As artists, we have innumerable influences. They start affecting us early, as soon as we are exposed to them, in fact. And herein lies a potential issue. How do those influences affect our art, our artistic mindset? Can they only help us, or can they hurt us too? This is exactly what we are going to cover in this episode. Artistic influences, how they affect us, the potential issues they cause, and finally, how to choose personal artistic influences that can help you on your journey. Well, what are artistic influences? For the purpose of this discussion, let's define artistic influence as such: the various artists, art styles, art pieces, and cultural elements that affect the direction of our art journey. These influences can take place consciously or unconsciously, and are often characterized by some manner of mimicry, copying, or stylistic shifting toward the particular artistic influences. All artists are influenced by other artists, and this is likely something we have no ability to change or prevent. There is a difference between I enjoy this artist and I am choosing to have this artist as an influence, and I think this needs to be dissected and understood. Finally, an art influence does not have to be linked to the artist necessarily. It can be linked to their art alone. Now, before diving in and discussing the good and the bad concerning artistic influences, I think it needs to be said that a basic awareness is key. You as an artist are likely unable to affect your influence stream without being aware of it, without being cognizant of its very existence. Only then can you modify it, can you take control. And as with so many things artistically, taking control and gaining some level of awareness of our tendencies seems to be key toward affecting our journey positively. The importance of good influences. We often talk about influences in our lives, especially when we are young. Perhaps your parents have commented on how spending time with a particular kid is a good or a bad influence for you. We understand innately that what is around us, what influences us, affects us. So let's take a look at some of the benefits of having good artistic influences in the same train of thought. They lay the groundwork for understanding and thinking about art in general. Our first influences, the art that hits us in our youth or ignites our excitement, often has the furthest reaching effects. If you think back to the first things that you ran into, the first art that grabbed at you, you can probably still see and feel its effects on your art today. So think back to what that is. Take a moment. Think back to the first things that artistically inspired you. The first time you grabbed a random sheet of paper or snuck away with your sketchbook to draw something of your own volition, not your parents asking you to do something or a teacher giving you an assignment. For most of us, this probably happened between the ages of 6 and 8, though for some people it happens much earlier. My earliest influences go back to video games on the original Nintendo. I was quite young when I had it. My father was a video game nerd, and so he was playing things in those early years, and I think having a child who was also old enough to play kind of gave him an excuse to get one in the house. The other thing is that my dad, being an Air Force pilot, flew reconnaissance all around the world, and so sometimes he would be deployed to places like Laos, Cambodia, or Korea. While he was there, he would go out and spend some time in the jungles and would document and draw some of the animals that were there and bring those home to me. So at perhaps 3, 4, or 5 years old, I have recollections of these beautiful things my father brought back, and my early art seems to bear that out. A lot of my early drawings are of snakes and lizards, and I love reptiles and amphibians and always have, and maybe that's even why. Maybe my love of animals and biology comes from those early years. It's hard to dissect this and understand it, but that's actually the whole point of this first note, is that our first artistic influences have dramatic effects. And I would push that assumption a little bit further to mean that each of the subsequent influences has less and less, but still then has a larger proportion of effect on the future. So if you are becoming aware of your artistic influences and you are just at the beginning of your journey, you probably have a lot more influence that you can affect on yourself moving forward. If you were my age, having worked on art for 20 plus years, and just now thinking about the artistic influences that you take into your life, It's going to have a lot less impact than if you are 14 or 16 or 18 or any age but just starting on your artistic journey. Another great benefit of good artistic influences is a diversification in stylistic influence and exposure. You are pulling from many locations. One of the best things that you can do is open yourself up to varying kinds of art, to take in cartoons and comics, very stylized Japanese comics and very stylized Western comics, and then also to take in Impressionism and realism and all these things. As these multiple differing art forms come into your stream of influence, you change. Your understanding of art changes. The ideas and concepts that come together can be fundamentally different than they would be for any other human. And there's a necessary beauty in this, that the recombination of these styles and elements is what is going to make your artistic style distinct at some point. If you only copy from a couple sources, especially if they are all similar, your art is not going to progress nearly as quickly or, more importantly, as interestingly as it will if you have a diverse stream of influences. And if style is important to you, then the recombination of many styles, many artistic influences is likely going to be what gets you there. So this can be a very important concept in thinking about a beneficial art influence for yourself. Another is cultural enrichment. When you find yourself influenced by a particular artist or art style, you often end up involved in that culture. Many of us as artists have this natural tendency to research, to explore, and to adventure into things we find interesting. This might border a little bit on obsessive for many of us. We have a tendency to get into a video game and instead of just playing through it and enjoying it and go, well, that was neat, I enjoyed that, we have a tendency to watch lore videos, to deep dive in our own research on the wiki associated with that particular game. We play the game over and over and over again. There are some unique traits about artists that do things like this. We get drug into that media. And if that media comes from a culture that is fundamentally different than our own, we end up enriching our own understanding of what it is to be human by engaging with that culture in some capacity. When you dive into manga, you cannot help but be immersed in some Japanese culture. There are funky little things that I know simply because I've been reading manga for 25 years. Little things that don't come up in daily life, but every once in a while someone will say something or mention something and I'll go, oh, I know that word. I know that reference. I have a very, very broad understanding of the currency of Japan because I've seen it represented so many times. These are little hints, little pieces of information that are lodged in my mind because I've engaged with the Japanese media for so long. Am I an expert? Not at all. But there are little pieces that inform my daily life. And likewise, if you live outside of the USA and you watch old school Disney cartoons, you are getting tiny snippets of American culture. American pop culture is quite pervasive, not only in America, but across the world. And there are pieces of what it is to be American that come out from those media. Another thing is the evolution of personal style. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but let's take a deeper dive into it for a moment. Your personal style is influenced by the artists you watch, the ones you copy, and the ones you admire. I'm not sure we're able to detach from this as humans. I think this is something that is just fundamental to what it is to be human. Style is honed through practice, and allowing yourself to be influenced by skilled artists can hone your style, pushing it forward at an increased speed. For so many artists who are so drawn to having an independent and individualized style, this is a huge win and a huge draw. Finding artists you really admire and learning from them can help you solidify your style. And when you absorb a lot of a particular artist's work, your art is almost always going to bear out some effect from that influence. This is amplified to a greater degree when it happens for a long period of time, when you copy their work, or when you are influenced by multiple artists with similar styles. If you are very drawn to From Software games, that dark, medieval, macabre manner of representing things, and you delve into that for a long period of time, replicating their artwork, but then also extrapolating and building your own, there is no chance in my mind that that will not influence your eventual art style discovery. You cannot help but allow your art style to be influenced by the things that you admire, by the things that influence you, and by the things that you copy. This can be a wonderful tool for you as the artist, a thing to allow you to sculpt your artistic style in a desired direction. The last of the benefits to good artistic influences I want to touch on today is innovation and experimentation. Great artists will often lead you to do things that are outside of your comfort zone. Naturally, you will be drawn towards particular things, particular ways of representing things. This could be as simple as, given no other outside influence, you only draw people from the front because it's more comfortable. There's more symmetry there, perhaps. Maybe that's just what you know. But if you are working from and allowing yourself to be affected by the influence of other artists, you are going to tend to do things that are just slightly different. Perhaps this artist never draws people straight on. They always draw them from a 3/4 angle. You're slowly going to start taking that into your style. You're going to experiment and innovate with things that were not particularly comfortable for you. Sometimes this happens because you just observe them so many times that you unconsciously start mirroring those things. And sometimes you actually study the artist and you move towards that more actively. So much beauty in art comes from trying new things, from working in strange and innovative ways. Trying digital art, for example, if you've only ever done traditional, can be a really interesting thing. It might not be for you. I have videos that I've done long in the past about why, if you are drawn towards one or the other, it's good for you mentally to try the opposite. If you've only ever done traditional art, moving into digital can feel very unnatural because in a lot of ways, that's exactly what it is. But the ability to move things around after you place them on the canvas, to copy and paste, to duplicate, to change the color, to undo, all of these things can be interesting tools for you. And if they keep you making the art for longer, if they alleviate some of the stress from making art normally, that can be a lovely thing. On the opposite side of that, if you only do digital, I really do think it is fundamentally important that you do traditional every once in a while. If I was working as a professional digital artist, I would probably try to take 1 month a year where I did nothing digitally. And I've seen this from a lot of people who work in digital fields. Sometimes this is engineers who spend most of their time on a computer. They yearn for the break to actually do physical engineering things. I've seen this from photographers. I've seen this from artists. I've seen this from a lot of different people. If what they work on is almost always on a computer, it's almost always digital, that a break from that can be really beneficial. And I really think if you spend all of your time drawing digitally, grab a Bic pen and every once in a while just sit down and draw things. It's a totally different experience and they can inform each other. And as an added benefit moving that direction, if you come up with some really beautiful things traditionally, importing them into the digital format is super, super easy. In fact, I'm looking at starting to do more of that. The drawings like you're watching in the background right now, I'm curious, like, what if I lay all of this out with just the gray tones and the black and white and then take it into Photoshop? That might be a really entertaining way for me to work through the artwork. So I'm going to be experimenting with that in the future, and I think you'll probably get to see that. Now let's move into some of the struggles that we can have with misaligned influences. I hesitate to call them bad influences, by the way. The connotation here is an awkward one, and I feel almost like it's not beneficial to think of art or artists in that context for now. However, I certainly believe you can have art influences which are poorly aligned with your artistic needs, your ambitions, your desires, and your personal goals. So let's look at some potential issues that can arise from that misalignment. An overemphasis on imitation. We often imitate our influences. We've talked about it several times already on this podcast. We admire them, and so we copy their work, slowly grafting pieces of it into our own style. This can be lovely and beneficial when things are aligned well, but it can also be very detrimental if the direction that influence is heading is radically different from your desired destination. In most cases, this is simply going to slow down your progress. If you are copying highly realistic things from Software games and your true desire is to develop a style like Animal Crossing, your time might be more wisely spent elsewhere. You could even look at it in some capacity and say that time had been wasted. I hesitate to call it wasted though, because art can be so beneficial and therapeutic for us as a hobby. But if your focus is career oriented, or you just have a strong desire to hone and develop that artistic style, time spent deviating from that is simply time not making progress towards your goal. In the worst case, when styles clash dynamically, you can actually attempt to learn contradicting things. This is much rarer, but highly stylized art can often bend, ignore, or break rules that other art forms find crucial. This can happen if you're not paying enough attention to your art influences, if you're allowing yourself to be influenced by things that misalign with your personal artistic goals. Now, I want to take a moment and specify, because I don't want this to come across as whatever your artistic style is or what you desire it to be, you should only look at and absorb art that is in that style. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that when you look at pieces of art, sometimes you're influenced by them, sometimes you're not. And I think as artists, if we really sit down and think about it, we can track where that line is for us. There's a lot of art that I look at when I scroll on Instagram, when I look on YouTube, that I admire, that I go, that's really cool. I'm glad somebody made that. But I don't have that spark of, oh man, I wish I could do that. I wish I had made that. That's a fundamental difference. I don't think there's any problem for us as artists to have lots and lots of things that we look at and we are drawn to that we find beautiful. But if you find that you are looking at 3 or 4 dynamically different influential ranges of art, and you are attempting to allow yourself to be influenced by all of them, it can be detrimental towards forward movement. Those styles are probably wonderful and beautiful in and of themselves, but if they clash with one another dynamically, they can throw you off the rails in your individual pursuit. In this case, perhaps the better thing to do is to simply hone in on a particular thing for now. There's no reason why you can't develop a very cartoony, childlike style artistically, and then later on develop one that is very, very realistic. And this might not be an issue for you as an artist. This might be something where your goal is to just do this over the long term and enjoy yourself, and in which case, ignore this point. But if your goal is to hunker down, to develop that artistic style, to fight and to move forward quickly, focusing on a particular set of influences that are going to collaborate with your goals, with your desires of developing that particular personal style, that's going to be much more beneficial, much more efficient for you at the very least. This next point is going to piggyback off of that though. Limited exposure to alternatives and variety. This largely occurs if you have too few influences, or if the influences that you have are all too similar to one another. Now you might notice this is pretty much the exact opposite of the issue that we discussed prior, and I've mentioned this many times on this channel, but the beauty, the good life seems to be somewhere in between the two extremes. The Aristotelian mean, yet again. There are so many benefits to allowing yourself to be influenced by a wide breadth of art, that you can narrow your field of vision and savagely curtail your progress by being too focused. So consider spreading your influential web and allowing more things to come in. But, as we mentioned with the prior point, make sure that it's balanced. And I really think that, like, for me personally, what I'm trying to do with this is have 2 or 3 influences that are really directly stylistically impacting me. These are the styles that if I could just find a way to hone the matrix and absorb that ability, I would do. And then I try to find a couple things that are way outside that realm that are really intriguing and they're benefiting to me, and I try to sculpt aspects out of those. And that's why these last 2 points can seem contradictory, is because they are extremes. You run into problems if all of your influences are the same, and you run into problems if all of your influences are too different from one another. So try to manage them so the bulk of your influences are really closely aligned with the stylistic choices that you want to make, and a couple outsiders are throwing some interesting spice in, some saffron, some maple, some balsamic vinegar. Don't mix those all together, probably, but just intriguing little spices that are different from the bland, run-of-the-mill versions of whatever the style could be. we're all trying to do something that's a little bit less stereotypical, aren't we? Self-imposed or external pressures. The art that influences you can tell you that you are not good enough. It can tell you unrealistic things about your progress or speed. It's important to be cognizant of what pressures that art is going to apply to you, and what pressures might come from the external world as well. If you are not careful, you can find that you self-judge your work based on the art that influences you, not recognizing the sheer quantity of time these influences have at their disposal or have already put into their craft. This is an ethereal category, but it is important to regulate the pressure you feel artistically. Too much can crush you in the same way that too little can keep you stagnant. Following a particular artist can push you in certain directions, and adhering to a particular style can do the same thing. Be cognizant of these. Be aware of the pressure that these things put on you. Be aware of the pressure that you are feeling and the pressure that you're putting on yourself. Art is hard. You've heard me say it a lot. You'll probably hear me say it a lot more times. It's a difficult journey. So be aware of the pressures that are being placed on you. Whatever keeps you in the craft, keeps you progressing, and perhaps most importantly, keeps your joy quotient high, is likely going to be the best benefit to you in the long term. So this has been a brief unpacking and unwrapping of the benefits of good artistic influences and the deficits of misaligned artistic influences. But how do you determine if an influence is good? How do you sort through the 10,000 influences you could possibly find in the library, on Amazon, at the store, or, like most of us probably take them in, on Instagram or YouTube? How do we sort through that ludicrous quantity of art? Choosing an art influence is akin to choosing an art mentor, though in this case, the mentor is likely unaware of your existence. You are siphoning off information and creativity from them, and they were gracious enough to make it publicly available for you to do so. So let's look at some of the things that you as an artist, that I as an artist can look to, and try to discern if a particular artist and their work is a good match for us, is a good influence for us on our particular artistic journey. The first thing is a personal connection. This is very broad intentionally, and we're going to unpack some of it. This can be with the artist themselves or with the art. A deeper connection may be better if it can be formed with both categories, but I'm unsure that it is needed. Do you connect with the artist as a human being? Is there something about their life, their station, that seems to resonate with you? In my case, I often gravitate towards artists that are older, more similar to my age. I like it when artists have families. They have kids because they have the same struggles and the same joys that I have in my life. I enjoy when I find artists who started in one career and then moved to their art later. Why? Because this is similar to me. I see myself in that. There's a personal connection. Likewise, sometimes you can connect with the art itself. There's something about the story behind it, whether it's unconscious or consciously absorbed, that can lead you into it. There's something about those characters, the eyes that they represent, that just pulls you in and you're inextricably linked to it. Either of these are super beneficial, and I would call this the personal connection category. This extends into that influence being aligned with your personal goals as well. This can mean a lot of different things. The artist and their work are similar to the work you are pursuing, perhaps, or maybe the stories they're trying to tell are similar to the stories you want to tell. Maybe this artist is proficient in an area that you are not. They're really, really good with watercolor, and your skill in that department is simply lacking. So by allowing yourself to be influenced by them, maybe you can glean some of their techniques and learn from them in that category and move yourself forward. Maybe this artist has very wise things to say, things that you might need to hear. Here are some examples from my life, because I don't like to sit here in this ethereal realm for too long. I can live in a vat of metaphor, but it is seldom that beneficial to anyone hearing me speak. Stan Prokopenko is one such influence on my artistic life. There's no BS to what he says. He's straight to the point with his instruction and his advice. He may hurt some people's feelings, but he does not waste my time, and I appreciate this. In the Draftsman podcast, it is him and Marshall Vandruff, another person that I'm going to mention in just a moment, and the two of them have great synergy because Stan doesn't really mince words. He doesn't mess around with feelings a whole lot. He's very logical and very literal, and I identify with that. Now, if you're a person who can have your feelings hurt by somebody else being very, very blunt, he might not be great for you. But that's the thing, the beauty of artistic influences is they are so diverse and personal to each of us. So let's go on to Marshall Vandruff, and one of the best things about him is he feels like an art grandpa. He's just this wonderful human being who often starts the podcast or his classes by singing. I have enjoyed pretty much every minute that I've listened to the man. I've taken 2 classes with him online, and it has been wonderful. He is an artistic influence for me, less artistically actually, and more in his mindset, in the psychology of how he looks at art. Though I really like some of the scrappy, ugly ink work that he does, and I'm not being degrading there, that's actually how he refers to it. But he does sloppier ink work sometimes, and I really enjoy the life and the vibrancy that comes out of that. Steven Zapata is another resource for me. He's reassuring, he's humorous, he has good meditation advice artistically, and his skill with working through a lot of psychological components of art is really beneficial to me. A lot of the things he talks about are often more fleshed out ideas of things that I've dealt with my students over the ages. Not to mention that artistically he's phenomenal. I love how he builds these massive drawings over 40, 50 to 100 hours with pencil and with pen. There's a lot of influence in that, a lot of encouragement in watching him work. Trent Kanuiga is another. He's an industry-specific information source for me. He worked for Blizzard for a long time. He writes novels and comic books. He builds video games. He does like basically all of the things that I would like to do and am working on doing as I get older. And so there's a lot of influence there. Another benefit to me with Trent is that he's older. He's a little bit older than I am. And so thinking about how he moves through things and hearing his advice just comes in a little bit better, being that he's lived some of the same stages of life that I have. He's endured some of the same things that I have, and that's beneficial to me. It might be beneficial to you too. These next ones I'm going to go through are more stylistic influences. These are going to be primarily Instagram artists, and I'll link everything here from all these artists in the description below so you can track them down if you would like to. Alex Vede is one, a wonderful inking and digital coloring artist. He's from Spain, if I'm not mistaken. I love his work. I have one of his comics, and I'm working on gleaning what I can from how he works on ink and then takes it in digitally. He's actually the one I was thinking of when I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. Luke Eidenschink is an amazing ink artist as well. He just kickstarted his first, to my knowledge, art book, and it did really well. He does what I do with ink, but on a whole other level, so I'm happy to use him as an art influence to take his skill in to try to figure out how he does things with directional line that I can't do yet. Fran Garces is another artist that I have been massively influenced by. He loves dragons, skulls, and creatures, and probably is my favorite currently living and working artist. I love the way that he just takes apart these complicated ideas and makes them understandable. His ink drawings are wonderful, his watercolor's wonderful, his digital's wonderful. He's probably the one out of all these that I would highly recommend that you check out. I'll have his Instagram link below. He's also got an art book, which is phenomenal. And if you love dragons and skulls and stuff like that, would probably be a great gift for yourself, because take care of yourself. We need to take care of ourselves. All of these artists are going to be linked below, again, like I mentioned, and I would recommend checking them out if you have a chance to do so. All right, getting back to some of the things that you can look for when you're trying to find a good influence for you, a good fit. Sources of influence that display their process. This is twofold. Artists who show the process of their individual works, and artists who show the process of their artistic journey. These things are not necessary, but if you're trying to find artistic influences that are going to be really beneficial for you, I think these elements are crucial. Understanding how an artist works through an individual piece is way more beneficial than seeing the finished product. When you can see how they solve the issues, you can start mirroring those things more directly. There's a big difference between copying an artist's style and copying an artist's artwork and copying an artist's process. The process is going to be way more beneficial for you in the long run, I believe. Whereas if you copy their finished work, you don't necessarily know how they got there, and so you're going to struggle to really do much with that over the long term. I also find it encouraging on many levels to be able to track back on a great artist and see where they started, to see where they were years ago. It's encouraging to me because I think, like many artists, I struggle with this idea of, were these people just born with this ability? Were they just better at a much younger age? So it's very beneficial to be able to go back on their artwork to see their whole artistic journey and go, oh, like they were an amateur at this at one point too. They drew bad drawings when they were young and they learned how to make good ones. This is something that for some of us is highly encouraging and highly needed because it shows us that there is at least a potential for us to catch up with the greats. Likewise, finding the infantile stages of a piece is encouraging. Pretty much all of our pieces have an ugly stage, like a baby eagle before its feathers grow in. It's encouraging to see that everyone, pretty much, has that same stage in their process. It can be very encouraging. Diverse sources is another thing you can look for when you're trying to intake good influences. It's key to make sure your influences are not all inhabiting the same pond or the same environment. They don't need to be wildly divergent, but the more divergent they are while still helping you, the better, I think. And I'm not going to expand a lot here. I talked about this with several different aspects earlier, but I think that the Aristotelian mean, the center between the two extremes, is going to be the most beneficial here. These last two aspects are a little bit more ethereal, but probably the most important of the bunch. You want to pick influences that are positive in how they impact you. Emotionally, if their work inspires you and gets you excited, that's a good thing. If you feel down or depressed or like a failure when you look at their work, regardless of everything else, they are not a good influence for you. They may be someday, but they are not right now. Sometimes when we look at artists that are far surpassant to our skill, we don't have the ability to dissect what they've done, and they just feel like a wizard or a magician. Their craft feels like witchcraft, and we can't benefit from it. So know yourself, look into your own artistic soul and try to understand, is this influence good for me? Is it impacting me positively? Do I have joy when I take their work in? And does that joy disappear when I go to my own work? This is crucial too, because sometimes you can look at art and just be so enthralled by it. But when you sit down with your sketchbook, you go, I'll never be able to do that. And if that's the case, I would wager that that influence is not a good influence for you. Now, perchance you need to work on the psychological ramifications and not over comparing yourself, but the point holds. And if you do struggle with comparing yourself, I have a podcast on that I would love you to take a look at, and I'll link that in the description below as well. Authenticity is our last component here. A good artistic influence for a younger or newer artist should not conceal their motivations or their strategies. You are looking for someone who is authentic, who is straightforward, and who can benefit you. This is going to change depending on who you are and depending on where you are in your art journey. But you want to find artistic influences that are authentic. They're authentic to themselves. They illustrate things the way that they want to, the way that they feel like they need to. If they have any political leanings, that they don't shy away from those things. But moreover, just artists that don't lie to you. Artists that don't obscure things. This might seem kind of ethereal in its nature, and perhaps it is, but I think that an authenticity to an artist is something that you can feel, something that you can ascertain without too much time invested into that. So look for artists that feel authentic to you. Artists that don't hide what they do, artists that show you their process, artists that don't feel like or present themselves as being superior beings because their artistic skill is beyond yours. Look for authenticity. Well, I hope this has been productive for you. I hope it's been beneficial for you. We all take in so many artistic influences, and if we are unaware of them, sometimes that is to our detriment. I hope as you explore the magnificent art world around you that you will take in some new artistic influences, some that are different from the ones that you've taken in the past, and some that are just like old shoes, so comfortable. Well, as always, thank you for listening. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.